CILT.
I am 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 the CILT.
I am CILT.
I am the CILT.
Because we are CILT, we are the future. We are what the world has been waiting for. I am CILT, you are CILT. Thank you.
Thank you, Chaitanya. This is actually a new start by all of us in the Hyderabad chapter, and each of us are learning as we go ahead. And these webinars are also being becoming quite popular day by day. And of course, we have the live the YouTube channel, so you can always look at them as per this one, Sadiq presentation. And in addition, next month we are planning to have a next webinar on it's the 26th of December. Again, fixed from 11 to 1, and it will be on logistics of COVID vaccine movement. I thought this will be appropriate time for looking at what are the logistics preparations that are going on and what can happen and how do we strengthen that. So that will be the next webinar topic. Date and time are fixed, 26th December, 11 o'clock. Okay. Having said that, now I'll give you a quick introduction of CILT. Yeah, Sadiq, next slide. So basically, CILT was started as Chartered Institute of Transport post the First World War in 1919 under a royal charter which was issued in 1926. So it's a professional body, internationally recognized, and having its headquarters in UK, and it has a membership of around 30,000 members spread over 30 countries. So the CILT International recognizes the national chapters, which are called national councils, and they themselves recognize further sections and branches. So this webinar that we are organizing is part of the Hyderabad chapter of CILT India, which is a constituent member of CILT International. So Indian CILT was formed in 1987, and it is very active both at the policy formulation stage and implementation issues of policy, and it has a regular interaction with industries and professionals, and it is active participant in furthering the logistics education both on its own and in association with various other educational bodies. So these are the brief objectives that we are given. These are the brief objectives that we are given. This is the logistics and transport, art of logistics and transport, and provide educational, professional, and skill development programs, and also the continuous professional education, professional development of various people that are involved in logistics. And the logistics education and education is not just simply limited to college level degrees, but both at the technician level and at operator level and various other levels, and increase our membership so that we reach to more and more people. So currently we have around 40 members. Recently 2 more corporate members joined, so it should be around 42. And we have around 3,500 professional members. And they are very active and spread over all the sectors of logistics. And for logistics is such a wide domain where anything can be related to logistics. So you have warehousing people, you have transport people, you have distribution people, and you have in transport itself there are various modes, and all the modes are represented, quite well represented. Though railways does have a little dominant share. In addition, recent activities of CILT included setting up of a woman in logistics and transport. Basically, till quite a few years back, logistics and transport was quite a male-dominant this one. But there is a large number of women, and CILT India and CILT International takes an active interest in promotion of women in logistics and transport. Then it becomes a balanced representation of various demands. Then there is continuous training activities that are conducted. So FOIS, which is Freight Operating Information Systems, there is a training program that was conducted for FOIS, and there is then in addition to that, we have what is called Transport Mitra. Along with the Transport Mitra, which is founded by one of our CILT members, Mr. Ramesh Kumar, there's a lot of activity that goes on health and safety of truck drivers. Then various conferences are held, of which one of them was the need for umbrella body in logistics sector. And then there is a program on rail siding and freight terminal management, which concluded, the fourth one concluded recently on the 27th, yesterday. So there are various training programs that we organize. In addition to that, CILT India has a lot of educational partners through which they give their training programs, especially for the lower level functionaries of operators or various drivers and all those things. So it also gets associated with what is called the Logistics Sector Council in promoting that educational aspects. Then it has conducted a few international seminars. The 2019 was supposed to be held in 20, but it got postponed for the obvious reasons. And also it is quite associated with the neighboring countries in promoting the logistics sector there. Okay. This recent webinar series is an addition from our Hyderabad chapter to CILT India. Okay. And most important is at the policy level, there is a continuous interaction with governments at various levels. With Government of India, there is it itself, the Department of Logistics was very recently set up under Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and there is active liaison between this department in formulating policy, implementation, all those things. And various studies or events are undertaken as per MOU with this with the department. That includes standardization of domestic cargo, container, and equipment, strategies for increasing rail share, convening an international conference. So we'll just stop here and then look how to join CILT. Those who are interested in joining, there are three categories of memberships: the student, the chartered, and a fellow. Student is as long as you're a student or just out of college, you can join. And in fact, in a lot of colleges, we're planning to set up what are called young professional chapters, so that students, once they are in their college and they come out, then there's better knowledge of logistics, and logistics can spread much better. Because right now, logistics, as of now, most industries and at most places is looked as the last thing that is there. When everything, marketing, finance, everything is settled and the logistics is looked at. And then, but if there is any problem, then logistics person is the first person to be looked up to. How do you solve these problems? Because they are much more resourceful compared to, and in a general sense, compared to many other departments. So we want to popularize this logistics at the student level so that it becomes more deeply ingrained into the process. Okay, next. So membership fee is for a life membership fee, it is 18,290, which is for most railway people, it is reimbursable. 90% is reimbursable. Not only railway, for many government entities, but even for private personnel also, it's a life membership. For so one time you pay 18,290. Then there's a regular interaction with various kinds of professionals. We continuously run close groups for interaction and knowledge. And in addition, there is this webinars, the seminars, and also the organized training programs, which members will get concession. Okay. Then there is, of course, a third membership called a fellow kind of membership, which is more by invitation, depending on the experience and all those things. There is a corporate membership, which if corporates would like to join, it is a 2,95,000 one-time fee, where you get concessions of 2 life memberships, and also you get various other concessions in training for fee and the delegate fee. So corporate memberships members are also requested to join in this organization. That's it, and we are giving the contact details at various points. If you want, you can send email to cilt.hyderabad@gmail.com. That we can reply to that also. Okay. Now we'll go to the webinar proper. This is it is, I think, the most opportune time for conducting this webinar on agri-logistics. Agriculture sector itself has been, from various reports, has been in a crisis. The farmers' crisis is continuously unaddressed, and everybody talks about it, but it remains unaddressed as per our impressions. And more importantly, the Prime Minister's goal of doubling the income is still appears to be quite far off. And to add to that is the recent farm laws that have been passed, which are creating, some people they are very favorable, but there are so many who have a lot of apprehensions. In addition, farm is a sector where everything gets affected. Now Delhi is blocked. I am sitting in this cozy corner with rains, where my farmers across the state, down south, are worried what happens to their standing paddy crop, what would happen to their blossoming cotton fields and chili fields and all those things. So any event that that affects us affects the farmers much more, because they represent a disproportionately large number of people. So this webinar is very apt. Our focus is on logistics, because there are lots of discussions that have happened on farm laws, what is their impact. But logistics, that is the movement from farm to fork, or farm to industry, or farm to other places, is very critical, and post-harvest losses are supposed to be quite high in India. So we have three eminent speakers addressing our this one. Sri Ramanjaneyulu garu, who is from Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Sri Unupom Kausik, who is from National NCBL, National Collateral Services Management Limited firm, is the president. And Sri Manek Gupta is Managing Director, Glencore India Private Limited. And this all the three speakers, after they address the sessions, it will be moderated by Sri Davinder Sandhu, who is retired civil servant and has a lot of immense experience, in which the others will introduce as and when his moderation starts. So now we'll start with Dr. Ramanjaneyulu. Dr. Ramanjaneyulu, I had known him since last 4 or 5 years. He's a very, very committed farm welfare activist. Though he was selected for civil services, coveted income tax, he refused that and decided to join agriculture, become agricultural scientist. But he was, though I did not speak to him, as per his own activities, I can make out that he was disillusioned with this agricultural, that bureaucratic setup, and came out of that and set up his own NGO called Center for Sustainable Agriculture. So of late, organic cultivation and organic agriculture has become quite popular. But he started that in way back in 2004, 2005, if I am not wrong. Maybe it was much before that also. And he has started and set up wide network of farmer producer organizations across AP and Telangana, and he is a regular policy advisor for various governments on various issues related to farm and farming. And in addition, he is also quite a popular communicator. He has addressed TEDx sessions, 3 TEDx sessions. He was there on the Satyameva Jayati program, talking about the current food status and its nutrient content. So we are very proud and privileged to have him in our panel. And now I request Sri Ramanjaneyulu garu to continue the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in fact, I joined to learn more from all of you to understand how logistics can be managed, because I work with large number of farmers and farmer producer organizations, and today we have seen the whole crisis farmers are facing, and they're trying to get over the problem, and solutions doesn't seem to be in the vicinity. So that was the context in which I joined. So I try to present my understanding of the problem from particularly logistics management point of view. currently the farmers are facing. And then even since I work closely with the governments also, even governments are facing kind of thing. So one of the key challenges is the first mile aggregation of the produce. So since we have small farms, and there is no planning exercise done at all in terms of what crop to be grown or what variety has to be grown. Till product comes to the market, there is no plan at all. So we don't know how much of what variety will come into the market. So there is no planning which can be done at the procurement level or storage level. So there's no way that planning is done today. Second is collection is a very expensive process. So the first mile aggregation cost is huge. Say per acre, if there is about 40 quintals, and then that 40 quintals has to come to one place, and then several such farms, after taking out what they require, what they consume locally, the rest of it, the marketable surplus comes to one place, and aggregating all that, and then from there somebody else will aggregate, from there somebody else aggregate. So by the time, even if it comes to APMC, there are 1 or 2 levels of aggregation. Even taking to APMCs is becoming very difficult for the farmers. So that's where the problem lies. So that's APMCs are far away from the farmers' farm. So that is one issue. Second issue is since the marketable surplus is small, it's not working out for the farmers. And second is where do they store? So when the crop is harvested, immediately farmers have to sell off, because there is no spaces for storage. Particularly if you take paddy, today there is a lot of paddy which is getting harvested in Telangana, and there is a rain, and there is no drying yard. So obviously the wet paddy with nearly about 36 to 40% moisture is what comes into the market, and farmers are selling away from the farms directly. And this aggregate, since that moisture is there, and all grain which is coming in doesn't have the same level of moisture. So some which is harvested, say 5 days back, 10 days back, may have lesser moisture. So when all these different lots are aggregated, then there is a huge damage which happens during the storage period also. And for storage, warehouses are also not there. Say, across the state, if you see, there are only very few places where storages are there. Say, if you take Andhra Pradesh, the East Godavari, West Godavari, where the largest area under paddy, there are no storage warehouses at all. Only few private warehouses are there, or the rice mills have the warehouses. Otherwise, there are no warehouses over there. So warehouse facilities are also a serious problem. And wherever the minimum support operations happen from the government side, that also is a serious problem, because say for example in Telangana, now this Kharif season we have about 56 lakh acres of paddy production, and nearly about 1 crore tons is the harvest. 1 crore tons is the total harvest which comes in. And if that 1 crore tons has to be procured, and I'm talking about 1 crore tons as a marketable surplus, and if 1 crore tons is a marketable surplus which the government has to procure as it promised, nearly about 25 crore bags is what is required, the gunny bags. And there were no bags actually. So when the government was making the plan, we were hearing, and then we were part of the discussions, etc. So finally, government has decided we will set up a gunny bag unit where the bags are produced, and then that bag itself is cost 25 rupees, and then that is cut into the farmer's price. So already the prices are very low. So 1860 rupees is the price, and then 25 rupees is the bag cost, which is already cut into the, and then this is a 40 kg bag. So 2.5 bags means about 65 rupees or so is cut per every quintal from the farmer. And at the state level, if you see, 625 crores is spent just on the bags. And since the bags were not there, many times procurement also doesn't happen. So that's the kind of scenario in which all these are there. So between the states also, it's the same problem. So government resorts to a centralized procurement. So wherever it is convenient for it, it will take, and then rest of the areas where it is not convenient, it won't take. As a result, in some states there is a 80 to 90% procurement. So Punjab, Haryana kind of states, there is a 80 to 90% procurement which happens. 90% actually, 90 to 95% procurement happens in those states, and there are states where there is only 10% procurement happens. So there is a distortion between the states which has been caused because of the convenience factor which government looks at. Secondly, whenever government moves into, say, decentralized, so states started decentralized procurement at least to meet their own needs. Say, Andhra Pradesh tried it, Chhattisgarh tried it, Telangana tried it to meet their own needs. When they started procurement, these all operational difficulties do exist, and wherever they could invest to get over these operational difficulties also, the centralized procurement continues, and then the storage, since the storage facilities are not there, there is a lot of rotting happens. So you have seen the several cases which have been filed in the Supreme Court about about this, and then nearly 25 to 30% of what is stored gets rotten in these warehouses because there is no facilities also. So certainly moving into a decentralized procurement and distribution and then model is something which is important. We'll come to that one. Second issue is often government talks about FPOs as a solution. So when government is talking about farmers cooperatives as a solution, as Ravibabu garu has mentioned, we started working with farmer cooperatives way back in 2008. So from there we were trying to build these cooperatives. So already there were packs, and then there were a lot of MACs, and then farmer producer organizations. So altogether there are a number of farmers organizations. But the investments from the government to support them, or the FPOs themselves putting in investment, etc., is very low. So the government support is very meager. In that situation, today we have 7,334 FPOs which are registered by FPO, by SFACT and ABAD, etc. But in that only about, and then altogether there's about 43 lakh members. And about 860 crore is the share capital which all these FPOs has, and 560 crores is just 100 FPOs, and all rest of them has about 1 lakh rupees or 1.5 lakh rupees, and you can imagine what the business they can do with that, and they can't get any access to the credit. So obviously FPOs have become very notional as there is no infrastructure facilities, etc. So some investments over there will certainly help. So if the government policy is to improve the first mile aggregation, building community institutions is the best approach, and we need to strengthen that one. Significant investment has to go there in terms of infrastructure building, access to working capital, human resource building, and a lot of innovations in design and then infrastructure facilities. So the same old way of procurement which is happening say 50 years back, 60 years back is not going to help because the damages are very high. Climate change has created a problem because last almost 10 years we are seeing exactly at the time of paddy harvest there is a rain, and nearly 30 to 40% of the crop is lost during that period. So it's like a very quick situation where I need to harvest in one day and then I need to sell off. That's the kind of situation which is. Many times after harvest, also grains get damaged because there is no storage facilities. And you might have seen when you are traveling on road, many times you see people drying the grain on the road, and you can imagine the quality what that grain will have. So drying yards is a serious issue. So in villages, we need to think of those facilities as well. So drying yards and procurement. And going beyond rice and wheat, we also need to think of fresh fruits, vegetables, so many things. So a clear plan at a local level is something which is important in terms of crop planning as well as infrastructure facilities and community institutions. I think these three are very, very critical. So a decentralized system is what seems to work. So that's the public policy change I look for. So I stop here and then I look forward for others to say, then we can have the discussion. So that's where actually the problem lies. So today, if you are seeing Punjab farmers agitating or Haryana farmers agitating and then the entire nation agitating, the new policy change or threat seems to be a threat for the farmers. While they may also provide opportunities, but farmers cannot take without changing these basic fundamentals at the ground level. Any new policy change will only further deteriorate the problem. Because market also looks for convenience. If the government is looking for convenience, obviously farmers also look. The industry also looks for convenience. So small and marginal farmers will be left out always, and they will only buy certain crops, and then where there is they come at a cheaper price, and the prices and everything would be a problem. So that's where actually the farmers are agitating today. So a kind of assurance from the center in terms of supporting this transition, and then building the infrastructure facilities, and then building the particularly the building capacities of the community to organize themselves and then have access to infrastructure, etc., is something very, very critical. May not be continuing what they were doing for last 50, 60 years, but the adapting to the new change, I think that is something which is important. The transition management, how do we handle, is something which is very, very critical. There is no doubt we need to transit, but what is that transit is something which should be clear. Second is involving stakeholders in the discussion. I think that is also very important. So even if you are bringing in a good policy change or bringing in a new technology, good technology, engaging the stakeholders is very important, not just thrusting on some change. Say 50 years back, 60 years back, we trusted the green revolution on the farmers. Punjab farmers never asked for green revolution. Punjab farmers never asked for procurement. So government, because they felt the nation needs it, we trusted on them, we designed that, and then made them to move towards rice wheat system. And today, if you're saying you're doing wrong, I think it is wrong from our side. We need to address this one. So I stop here. What I would be interested to understand is how we can improvise the logistics, particularly when there are so many small producers. I think that's the key challenge. When you have large number of small producers, what are the new technological innovations or institutional innovations we need to make so that this can be done effectively, and so both in terms of quality wise and in terms of economics. I think that is the key challenge. I'll stop here. I look forward.
Thanks, Andy Ramu Garu. That's a nice, short and brief exposition. I think further questions than the problems that you posed will be Sandhu will take over, and then we'll go on to the discussion. Sadiq, now you can start Mr. Manek Gupta's presentation. So before we go, Mr. Srikanth will introduce Manek Gupta. We are very happy to have Manek Gupta, who is quite experienced and independently handled a lot of issues related to logistics.
Sri Manek Gupta is currently the Managing Director of Glencore Agriculture India Private Limited. Sri Gupta has done his BCom from Delhi University's prestigious Sri Ram College of Commerce, following which he has done his Masters in Business Administration from IIFT Delhi, focusing on commodity trade. Mr. Gupta has extensively worked in the import and export industry across various countries, specializing in commodity risk management, international business, trading, risk management, and on commodity markets. He has also had an extensive stint as a commodity trader himself. He will be taking us through an overview of the agriculture sector in India. Over to Sri Gupta.
Thank you, Shrikant. Thank you for the kind introduction. If you can put up the presentation, the brief presentation that I have shared. So the objective of this brief presentation is there are probably 10 or 15 slides, but I'll try to go through it in 10 to 15 minutes. The idea is to just give an overview of the Indian agriculture sector. The following points will be covered. Just a brief snapshot of the agriculture and food value chain in India, the macro highlights of Indian agriculture, which most of us would already know of. What's the place of India from a global production consumption standpoint? Then what sort of trajectory the Indian agriculture in terms of production has had, as well as horticulture crops. What are the various exports in agriculture and allied sectors out of India? and a very short note on what the current road and port capacity growth prospects look like. So moving to the agriculture and the food value chain, just could you go back a slide? So this is, next slide, please. So I think this table really tells you what are the various interplays at work in the agriculture and the food value chain. You have input companies talking to farmers, engaging with farmers, directly engaging with food companies. You have farmers engaging with traders, with food companies, with retailers and consumers directly. You have traders who are then selling to retailers. You have food companies engaging with retailers. And then you have consumer, who is the end consumer, is basically got multiple channels of procurement. So when we talk about the logistics sector, it's basically a one-to-many relationship that each stakeholder in the business has with the other. Next slide. So when we talk about logistics, are we only talking about from the farmer to the processor, or we are talking about the entire value chain from farm to fork, like Mr. Ravibabu mentioned in the introduction? So it's a very complex system, very integrated system, various factors at interplay because the long value chain from farm to fork. Just a few insights, highlights of the Indian agri sector. We are a country of almost 1.4 billion people. 2/3 of India lives in the rural part of the country, what we now call Bharat. 1/3 lives in urban centers. We have almost 141 million hectares, which is sowed. Roughly just under half is irrigated, half is rain-fed, which is a very high number from global standards. Our GDP in 2019 was just under $3 trillion, and agriculture only accounted for 16%. As all of us know, that this number was much higher. The share of agriculture was much higher as a percentage of the GDP, a few decades ago. But the boom in the services sector has obviously reduced the share of agriculture in entire GDP. On a per capita basis, we are just over $2,000 per capita income, and the projected growth rate is 4.2% for 2019. One important number to note in this is that even though we have 141 million hectares which is being planted, it is done by almost 140 million households. There are roughly 300 million households in India which make up the population of 1.4 billion. And roughly just under 50% of the total household population is engaged directly or indirectly in the agri sector. So it's a huge responsibility for the country, for the government of the country, for the privates to make sure that agriculture does not lag behind, because almost 50% of the entire country's fortunes are dependent on it. Next slide, please. This is just a quick comparison of yields between some selected crops between India and the world. As a previous speaker mentioned, that we had a step increase in yields in the 1960s as part of the Green Revolution, which is where you see the blue line, and the orange line is where we are today, and the gray line is the world average. So if you look at cotton, we are still 34% below the world average. Corn, we are 47% below the world average. Barley, 12%. Wheat, 3%. But don't be misguided in case of wheat. India is only one of the few countries that actually plants wheat on irrigated land, while everybody else plants it on rain-fed. So our irrigated yields are similar to rain-fed yields in the rest of the world. Sorghum, we are down 37%. Soybean, we are down 70% from world average. Now, one of the reasons touted as such a kind of disparity in yield is GM and non-GM, but that's a discussion for another time. Rice, we are still, even though we are, we are still 13% below world average. Next slide, please. So I want to just give a brief snapshot of what is the place of India in the world agriculture context. Now, if we don't talk about the top left chart, if we just go down to the bottom left, you see these are slightly dated numbers, but the numbers have not changed much. In India, we produce roughly 300 million tons of cereals. The world production is about 2.8 billion tons. So we are roughly 10% of the world cereal production, third in the world, third to China and US. I don't want to go through the entire list, but if you look at all the items in the list, wheat, rice, pulses, groundnut, rapeseed, sugarcane, in all of these, we are in the top two or top three. If you look at cotton, we are the second largest. When you look at vegetables, we are the second largest. Fruits, we are the second largest. Potatoes, we are the second largest. Onions, we are the second largest, all second to China. So what this really tells us is, if you look at total cereal production, we are at roughly plus or minus 300 million tons. When you look at all the horticulture crops, we are also at about 300 million tons. And this number, obviously has significantly increased over a period of time. So we are producing 600 million tons of food, which is both cereal as well as fruits and vegetables, which is a massive number. Now, the amount of logistics which is needed to transport this 600 million tons from farm to fork requires a lot of sophistication in handling of this large volume of 600 million tons. But having said that, this entire 600 million tons doesn't have to move to a third-party end consumer. A lot of this is grown for subsistence farming. So if we look at wheat, for example, we produce 100 million tons of wheat. Our estimate is not more than 50% of the wheat is actually sold in the open market. The rest 50% is retained by the farmer for home consumption, for subsistence consumption. So same is the case with some of the other crops. But having said that, there is still a massive movement that happens within the hinterland, within the country, for these crops to go from farm to fork. Just in terms of export, there's a slide on that a little bit later. But even though we produce 600 million tons of food crops, food and vegetables and fruits, a very small portion of that is actually exported. We'll come to that slide later. But this 600 million tons is primarily, from a logistics standpoint, hinterland logistics. It's not export, it's not port logistics, which is why even though we produce 600 million tons, it does not put pressure on port capacities in India. When we look at livestock, we are again one of the largest producers of, we've got one of the largest livestock million heads, as you can see. We are the largest milk producer in the world. We are the third highest eggs producer in the world, which is all kind of proxy commodities. Now, this is something that I mentioned, that this is how over the last 2 decades, this is how much the production has increased by. Food grains have gone from just under 200 million tons to just under 300 million tons now, just on 270 million tons. This number is probably a couple of years old, so we may be much closer to 300 now. So 71 million tons. So we don't see a lot of export happening in this 71 million tons. As the population of India has grown, so has the food production of India. So it has still been sort of hinterland, sort of transport, warehousing, logistics that has worked to get 270 million tons of food grains from farm to fork. Just a short breakup on the right where it tells you, what that breakup is. Not so important. On the right side is also something very interesting, where you see horticulture production. And our previous speaker talked about that as well. We've gone from 280 million tons to 320 million tons. And the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate on horticulture, is almost twice as that of food grains. One interesting sort of trivia for our audience even though we produce 300, we almost produce the same amount of horticulture crops. We are using less than 20%, 80% of the area is still with food grain, and only 20% of the area is with horticulture. As I mentioned on the left, you can see what the CAGR of food production has been. We've grown by roughly under 2%, 1.6%, which is actually quite beautifully sort of correlated itself with the increase in population growth in India, which is why we've generally been, self-sufficient over the last 20 years. Even though our populations have increased, the growth of food has kind of kept pace with the population growth, which is why there have been no great spikes in prices for the most part. On the right side, you see a very interesting statistic as well, that if you see over the last 20 years, we have actually, even though we are producing more, there is no more land under cultivation. In fact, over the last 2 decades, what we are seeing is that there can be more land that can come into cultivation, but it hasn't happened. So, the cropping intensity, though, has increased. That means we are planting the same land more than once now. But if you look at the total area, we are pretty static at about 140 million hectares. We've seen a reduction in coarse grain area, which has gone from almost 32 million hectares to 23, 24 million hectares. And in pulses, we've gone from in the reverse direction, where we've gone from 22 million hectares to about 30 million hectares. And this is all thanks to the increase in the minimum support prices and focus of the government on pulse production since 2015. So it's quite a recent sort of an event. Next slide, please. This I thought is also interesting. This chart talks about what is the per capita availability of food grains and cereals we have. We have roughly just about 480 grams of per capita availability of food grains. Like I said, the availability of food grains in the country has kept very good pace with the population growth in the country. So we haven't had a massive problem with regard to that. If you look at pulses, we've gone from 33 grams a day to almost 55 grams a day, again, thanks to the increased area and increased imports over the last few years. This slide only talks about food grains, but if you look at per capita availability of horticulture crops like fruits and vegetables, we are almost at 600 grams of horticulture availability at a gross level per person per day. Now, there is this whole talk about wastage at the farm level because logistics, cold storages, that entire chain not being available at the farm level. And I don't have any hard statistics on it, but talk is that 30 to 40% of perishable produce never makes it to the consumer. So from 600, if you take out 30%, you still have almost 400 grams, which is also the recommended availability by ICAR for fruits and vegetables. Of course, when you look at the NSSO statistics, you will see there is a huge disparity in that number, that it's not equally distributed. In fact, it's extremely unequally distributed throughout the various stratas of the society. Again, like I talked about, one of the other reasons for the increase in yields over a period of time is irrigation. There are more and more states, especially the central Indian zones, and even in north of India, where irrigation support has been immense and it's improved drastically over the last 2 decades. You see Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, all having more and more access to irrigation, which is helping overall productivity. This is what I was talking about earlier, where we are exporting as a country about 40 billion, just under $40 billion of agriculture and allied sector exports. The highest number being marine products, just under 7 billion. So even though we are producing 600 million tons, I don't have the exact number of marine products, but basmati and non-basmati is about 10 to 12 million. Oil meals is again a very small number now. Sugar is about 5 to 6 million tons. So if you add up the total combined tonnage of this number, it would not be more than 5 to 6% of the total production of food grains in the country. So 95%, 90 to 95% is consumed domestically in the country, or at least part of the state reserves, government reserves, and a small part of it gets exported. On the other hand, when you look at import of agricultural products, the single largest import item in India is edible oil. We are dependent on roughly 2/3 of total consumption through imports, which is mainly coming from Southeast Asian countries, Ukraine and Argentina. So just again, tying in with the theme, which is logistics today, our reliance on kind of import is restricted to a few commodities. Most notably is some fresh fruits and edible oil. And on the export side, depending on year to year, a constant flow is rice and cotton and sugar over the last couple of years. And of course, you've got buffalo meat and marine products, which is a regular feature as well. Now, again, coming back to this theme of, how this, just putting the overview in agriculture together with, like I said, out of 600 million tons, if we say 300 million tons is consumed at the farm level and 300 million tons is either procured by the government or moves to the end consumer, most of India is hinterland logistics, which means that, the top part of the slide, which is, and a lot of that moves by road. I've just put some trends out there that just in terms of capacity building, we are seeing highway construction in India over the last few years really ramp up. The CAGR of 21% looks too good to be true, but yeah, we are starting at a very small base. If you look at the total number of construction units which are sold in the country, that also has a positive trend that again talks about more and more infrastructure investment in the country. One of the other proxy indicators for investment in infrastructure is how many commercial vehicles are being produced in the country. And in terms of trend, that is also an increasing trend. On the export side, now, like I mentioned in one of my first slides, that we are still well below world averages in terms of production of most of the things that we produce. What happens if, because of these new agri-farm laws, if we were to all of a sudden catch up to world averages? Do we have enough demand domestically to consume? Instead of 600 million tons, if we go to 800 million tons, can we consume that additional 200 million tons? In the short term, probably no, which means that we will need to find export markets as long as we are price competitive. Now, that's another story, probably for another webinar, that most of the Indian agri-produce is actually outpriced compared to world market. Take an example of sugar, take an example of soybeans, take an example of corn, of wheat. All these have to be subsidized by the government before it can meet the world price, at least today's world price. So, but in the event, we went up in production and the price parities were in place, what sort of port capacities do we have in India to export this additional 200 million tons? Now, to me, that number today is 20 million tons. If that number goes to 200 million tons, at the current port capacity and port logistics, I just can't imagine how we can export 200 million tons. But over a period of time, as we've seen, that port capacities have been going up as well. So over time, I would imagine those capacities will get created for us to be able to handle more volume. Now, if you look at port capacities of major ports, obviously the 12 government-owned ports, is about 1.5 million tons. The actual throughput out of them is about 700 million tons. All that is kind of, if you look at the general trend, they're all increasing over time. The share of non-major ports, which includes all the private ports, is steadily increasing from about 39% a decade ago to now getting close to 50-50 with the idea is that, in the event that we had a step increase in production because of some of the changes that the government is doing to the farm laws. In the short term, I don't think we have the capacity to export this cargo. But in the long term, I think if this is going to be a structural change, I think the market will find an opportunity. The privates or the government just needs to be an enabler, and the privates needs to find the investment and the solutions to make sure that we're able to export this additional produce that might be available because of a step increase in production. So this was just a short sort of an overview on Indian agriculture. Any specific questions with regard to logistics, I think we can take in the panel discussion. And our next speaker, they are in the business of agri-logistics, so I leave all the heavy lifting to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Manek. That's a good overview of the agriculture sector. And without these base numbers, how much to plan for is always not very clear to anybody. So these base numbers give a good basis. And so as you already preempted me introducing Unupom, Unupom Kausik will now be covering the basics of this logistics. He has immense experience, and he will be introduced by Mr. Balaji from Guntakal. Yeah, Balaji, over to you.
Kausik is President of National Collateral Services Management Limited. And Sri Kausik has had his education in a Bachelor's in Technology from Malviya National Institute of Technology, and followed by an MBA from IRMA, and then fellowship at International Cotton Institute, University of Memphis. And Sir has started his career with Rajasthan State Electricity Board, and has worked with Anagram Com Trade Limited, and has developed his expertise on commodity trading, and also followed by his work in NCDEX, and developed expertise in working of exchanges, and then in cotton trading at Olam Agro India Limited. And presently they work in providing a bouquet of services to manage risk across various stages for the agri-commodities. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you very much, Mr. Ravibabu, for providing this opportunity to share my views with this august panel of speakers, as well as the very well-informed audience which are in the business of managing logistics of the economy at large. So I will cover 3 points in my presentation. I'm not using any PPT, but I will broadly divide into 3 components. The one is that what are these agri reforms all about? So I will give a very brief introduction because it's a big subject, and in the nature of limited time, I would limit to the broad points of these reforms and how they are going to influence the overall logistics scenario in the Indian agriculture system. So Manek has shared a good amount of data with us, and I will just add to some of the slides that he has done from in the perspective of these reforms. The 3 basic laws, the 3 basic reforms which the government has introduced. One is that freeing the farmer from the obligation to sell his produce in the Agriculture Produce Marketing Committee. That's the first reform. The farmer is free to sell his produce to anybody and anywhere in the country, and can reach out to the interested customers directly. Eventually, right now directly through a bilateral method, but eventually through a pan-India IT platform, which government will introduce in the version of INAM 2.0, where all the transactions will have to be routed through electronic platforms. There will be numerous platforms which will come into being, and they will be supervised by a mother platform. Those planning is already under implementation, as in works under the auspices of Ministry of Agriculture. So essentially what this law says that farmers were bound to bring their produce into an agriculture produce marketing committee, and the buyers were bound to pay a marketing fee, APMC fee, for buying that produce from the farmer. But I would like to share some statistics which will make it obvious that the APMC the condition was not at all implemented either in the letter or in the spirit. I mean, as Manek has put the number of 600 million tons, I would just make a small amend that India produces close to 1 billion ton of agriculture produce if we look at in the primary terms. So I think Manek has used sugar in the sugar form rather than sugar cane form, because the sugar recovery is around 10 to 11%. But if we take the primary agriculture produce, non-horticulture crops is around 700 billion ton, 695 to be precise in 2019 numbers, and horticulture produces around 320 million tons. So around 1.020 billion metric ton is the total agriculture produce in around 192 million gross crop area. So 141 million is a net crop area, and we have close to around 1.41 cropping intensity. And the cropping intensity is 1.41 because of the difference between rain-fed and irrigated. So this entire billion ton of produce was supposed to have been marketed through APMC, but in last 10 to 15 years, a lot of states have exempted for horticulture produce from the APMC clutches. So there are most of the states have gone and declared that horticulture is not required to be sold through any APMC. So that was one reform which many states undertook on their own, and that left close to around around 700 million ton of the non-horticulture, out of which if you take the sugar cane production out, then you are left with around 300 odd million tons of all the other crops put together. Now, if you do a calculation of the APMC fee state-wise, the number of marketing fee that should have been collected by all the states would have been a humongous figure. But if you look at 2018-19 numbers, the total agriculture produce marketing committee fee that was collected was only 11,300 crores, and out of which 5,300 crore was collected between, was actually paid by state agencies, which is Cotton Corporation of India, Food Corporation of India, NAFED, and some state agencies. So close to 50% of the agriculture produce marketing fee was actually intrastate transfer from the MSP agencies to the agriculture produce marketing committees, and the remaining close to around 55% of the money was actually paid by the buyers other than the government agencies to the marketing committees for the produce they bought. So the point I'm trying to make here, that a very minuscule portion of the non-horticulture produce was actually getting sold through APMCs, which is reflected in the APMC market fee collection for 2018-19. 19-20 numbers are not yet out, and I am sure that those numbers will not be any different. Out of this 5,300 crore money that was paid by the MSP agencies, the bulk of it was collected by Haryana and Punjab. So 3,600 crore was Punjab and 900 crores approximately by Haryana. So around 4,500 crore odd was collected by these two states. So that is where the biggest protest is also coming from in the form of farmers' protest. So the point here is, as government has actually ratified what was already happening on the ground. When the material was anyway not getting sold through APMC, what was the point of keeping that relic of a law that the farmer has to sell the produce through APMC only when it was not being practiced? So it is only a ratification of what is already happening on the ground, and I do not see that that is going to make much of a big difference. The big difference that the agriculture reforms will bring in is the second one, which is the formalization of the contract farming. Now, we have been hearing about contract farming concept for last almost 20 years now, since the Frito-Lay, which is a subsidiary of Pepsi, has started potato farming, and then a lot of other companies also took it up. So I would like to go back in the history a bit, that how the Indian farming will actually get influenced with this particular reform. See, we need to look at what are the success examples in the Indian agriculture over last 7 decades. It's not that Indian agriculture has no successful examples of policy intervention, but if we look at the 4 key success examples, one is the Green Revolution, in which India became independent in production of cereals, which is wheat and rice. The second one that comes to mind is the Operation Flood, which is White Revolution, or the milk production process, the milk economy growth. The third one is Operation Golden Flow, which is essentially the edible oils thing, when in the 80s there was a massive spike in the edible oil prices. The palm was not on the horizon, and there was a massive government intervention in encouraging the seed crushing units, solvent extraction plants, encouragement to edible oil seed production. And the fourth one, which is the most silent one, but we have experienced its impact directly, which is the Operation Operation Gold, which is essentially about horticulture and honey. So what is the common factor in these 4 success examples of Indian agriculture? If the success, the common factor is a triad, which is growth in production, the facilitation to aggregation, and the facilitation to distribution. All these 3 triads came into being, and that is where the concept of logistics come into being. So let's start with the the Green Revolution. So it was facilitated by advent of modern hybrid seeds. It was facilitated by Food Corporation of India, which was the aggregating agency and which set up a very robust aggregation model in the states where the modern seeds and wheat and rice were introduced. And then obviously its consumption in the form of public distribution system. So production, aggregation and distribution, all 3 things were responsible for making Green Revolution a success, because it was adopted by every component of the value chain. Same thing goes for the milk sector, the dairy sector. So the cooperative movement in milk sector started from Gujarat. Again, it was an increase in the productivity by introduction of artificial insemination, improvement in the milk yield by bringing the hybrid varieties of cows, and its collection at the farm gate by the unions and their the village level distribution, and then it's the whole aggregation up to the union level, and the marketing at the federation level, which is we all know in the form of Amul. So there also the success had these 3 common things: production, aggregation, and distribution. The same thing holds true for Operation Golden Flow, which is the edible oil revolution. So a facilitation of the solvent extraction investment in crushing, and the same thing in horticulture. So as Manek has pointed out in one of the slides, I'll just make some comment. In between 2005 and 2020, if we look at 15 years, the CAGR of the non-horticulture crop is around 2%. And the CAGR of the horticulture crop is around 4%. So horticulture, where there is no MSP, there is no government intervention, grew at 2x of the rate that we witnessed in the non-horticulture crop. And that actually points out to one clear thing, that wherever government does not intervene much, the market forces will make amends to the pricing mechanism, the productivity mechanism, the investment in production systems, and its aggregation and distribution. I mean, it's suffice to say that whatever the horticulture crop production increase has happened, it has been able to satisfy the growing demand of the horticulture consumption in India. So, what is its linkage with the second reform, which is contract farming? It's very important from the perspective of the distribution of land holding. I mean, as Manek has presented in his slide, at 140 million, which is around 141 million hectares of the net crop area. It is distributed between 14.6 or 14.7 crore the farmers. And that number in 2011 stood at around 11 crore farmers. So there is an increase of almost 30% of land holding entities, which is basically indicating towards the fragmentation of land. So in the last 10 years, the fragmentation of land holding continued its, I would say, a negative kind of an outcome, because the more fragmented the land is, productive.
Live streaming is on.
Yeah, please go ahead, Anupam.
Yeah. So if you look at the productivity numbers, they can come only from the aggregation of farm holdings, without which all reforms will not deliver the intended outcome of improving the farmer condition. Now, if you look at this 14 crore farmers for approximately 141 million net crop area, the distribution is at 5% farmers. I mean, 0.7% farmers own 10% of the land. 4.3% farmers own 21.6% land. So around 5%, 4.3 plus 7.7 is around 5% farmers own close to 1/3 of the India's land. And the 95% farmers own the remaining 70%. So what is the solution to address this lopsided distribution of land holding? And the solution that comes to mind is that some way this land has to be brought together, where the scientific agriculture can happen, and that would require investment. I mean, most of you who have some understanding, I think Mr. Ramanjaneyulu would have a comprehension of the farm productivity. It requires close to around 200 to 300,000 rupees an acre. Those are 2 to 3 lakh rupees of investment minimum before the productivity can be expected to grow, either in the cereals or in the horticulture. The productivity gains have happened in last 5-7 years in many pockets of the country, and all those episodes have come with the investment, and that no small and marginal farmer can actually do it, because if you ask a farmer to invest 300,000 to 400,000 rupees an acre upfront, and then he will start reaping the benefit from second and third year onwards, it is difficult. It's almost impossible. So to facilitate that investment, there has to be a private capital that should flow in. And that leaves a very important question on table, that how the capital will flow in. In last 7 decades, if we look at, I mean, the recent decade we look at, which is, I would say, one of the better decades, the gross capital formation in the agriculture system has been around 2.4% at the constant prices, and around 6 to 7% at the market prices. So the component of economy, which is which is contributing 16% of the GBA share, and around 55% of the population in the country, a 2.4% gross capital formation, which is an indicator of future productivity and income, is a very, very anemic and a pathetic 2.4%. The reason behind this low gross capital formation in agriculture, because the returns have been suboptimal, either for the private investor or even by the farmers themselves. So to break this logjam, the capital has to be invited into the agriculture production system, which has to be supported by investment in the aggregation, which is going to throw up the logistics component, and obviously the distribution, which also is linked to the logistics. So this is just to complement what Manek has said, that the two bills, a direct connect between farmer and consumer, and the contract farming, the formalization of contract farming, will lead to bridging the gap between Indian productivity and the global productivity. Manek has rightly captured in his slides that India has a fraction of productivity numbers as compared to the global averages. But if you compare the global best, the gap will become even starker. It will become even more deep. Now, if the investment has to come in, this investment will flow into the aggregation first, because the produce has to be preserved at the farm gate. And just to give you an example, a modern logistics it requires huge amount of investment, and we know it very well because we have done it over last 10 years, and we are continuing to make that investment. The difference between a bag storage, what you see in the at the farm gate in today's context, it costs around anywhere between 4,000 rupees a ton to 6,000 rupees a ton. But if you are to invest in the modern storage infra on a pan-India basis, it costs anywhere between 12,000 rupees a ton to 16,000 rupees a ton. That's a massive increase. I mean, it's almost 3 to 4 times. But it pays off over a long period of time, because it saves not only on the operation cost to the extent of 5 to 7%, but also it saves almost 70 to 80% of the spoilage or the wastage, as you call it. That number varies from commodity to commodity, but 60 to 70% of the wastage can be plugged. So if we are looking at a nation as a company And if we need to plug this operational cost and this value loss in spoilage and wastage, which put together could be anywhere between 10 to 12% to produce. So we are talking about improving the availability by 10% itself in delivering from farm to finger. I normally avoid calling farm to fork because we Indians eat our food with our fingers. So this farm to fork delivery can improve by almost 10%, but that would require massive investment, almost 3 to 4 times of today's unit economic cost of storage. And that would need enormous government support to facilitate those kind of investments, because all these investments are long gestation investment. They recover their value over 10 to 20 years of time. NCML is working with Food Corporation of India to set up around 13 silos. Each silo will be able to do an aggregation of 50,000 tons, and the movement of goods will happen through railway wagons, specially designed railway wagons. There would not be any requirement of bags, as Mr. Ramanjaneyulu mentioned that for 1 crore ton of paddy in his home state would require 25 crore of gunny bags. But this modern bagless storage, bulk storage, will eliminate the need of those gunny bags. So there is going to be an enormous opportunity if these two bills result into bridging the gap between today's productivity and the global averages, and possibly even the global best. That would require massive investments in the form of gross capital formation in the Indian agriculture system as a whole. Just to give you an example on the horticulture, today there are companies who have invested in the horticulture value chains, and they're talking about value loss not more than 5%, as compared to the documented numbers of 25 to 30%. And they made investments and they are recovering that value, but you require deep-pocketed investments from either Indian investors or the global investors. And we need to be mindful that if, by God willing, India is able to bridge the gap between our productivity numbers, India will not be able to consume that surplus production, and we need to look at the neighbors to take that off from our farms and increase our agriculture exports. That would require another set of investments in the international trade related logistics, port logistics, the quality of handling methods that we do. Just to give an example, what Indian production can do. I mean, we all know about China's growth story of last 3 decades. But you would be surprised to know that despite all their growth in their economy and becoming the second largest economy in the world, even today, China imports close to 130 to 140 million tons of food for its people from countries like US, Brazil, Argentina. And if we are able to reach the global averages of these cereals, which is soybean, maize, cotton, and many other such commodities, its value is approximately $65 billion today. I mean, China imports $65 to $70 billion worth of agriculture import in the food for its people. India can easily meet that challenge and can replace the suppliers of Argentina, Brazil, and US by being next door or at the gate of the Chinese consuming public. So the point I'm trying to make here that if the policy response gets further strengthened by facilitating the investments in the both production and aggregation system, by taking help of these two bills, India can actually bridge the gap, or India can actually reclaim the opportunity which we lost in 1991. And that's why we in the industry call these reforms as the 1991 movement, where everything was liberalized except agriculture. If the agriculture also was given the same opportunity and the facilitation in 1991, I'm sure we would not have been having this webinar. We would have been talking about how to handle the international markets. So India can easily take a lot of market share away from the competing production countries in the neighboring countries like Middle East, Europe, even China is the biggest example, and some of the ASEAN countries which bring a lot of agriculture commodities from rest of the globe. So the opportunity out of these reforms, clubbed with good investments, I'm optimistic that we can easily achieve at least a high single-digit growth, around 7 to 8% growth in agriculture by productivity, by aggregation, and by distribution into the neighboring countries, because India will certainly take a portion of that increased production, but we need to compete with the multinationals, and I'm sure that companies like Glencore will help us in doing that by competing with the farmers of Latin America and United States. But the opportunity is very huge, and 6 to 7% of the GDP, the growth in the agriculture is easily doable by investments if we are able to increase the GCF from 2.4% to around 7-8%. And there I would like to point out that there is one missing link in the reforms, and I'm sure that government is looking at it, is that India has been able to make a position for itself in the IT industry now, because after 1991 reforms, massive tax breaks were given to investments in IT. And that actually created huge capacity and capability, which actually could use the demographic dividend and the increasing education level in the country, which could channelize into the IT software services, and we could become a force to reckon with in the IT industry. The same approach is needed in agriculture, where long period tax breaks would be required to improve the gross capital formation, because the investment in the logistics to handle this aggregation and distribution is going to be humongous for 140 million hectares of land if it increases its productivity by 10%. And that's an optimistic number. That's a very conservative number I'm putting. 10% increase will yield to 60 million tons or 65 million tons increase. And if you do all calculations, India will not be able to consume more than 25 million tons of that incremental production over next 10 years. Incremental I'm talking about. There would be a base growth, and there would be an incremental growth. So this remaining 30-40 million tons would need to find markets in neighboring countries, and the most plausible place for distributing that is China. So the future of agriculture logistics is very, very promising today. A huge amount of money is required, and it will be profitable if somebody looks at it.
Thank you, Unupom. It's a very, very wonderful exposition. Actually, I think each of us, all three speakers coordinated very well to fit into each module. Anjaneyulu Garu and the production side, and Manek at the overall perspective, and Unupom giving the logistics overview. That's a very, very wonderful exposition, and all the speech we can see through his experience and in the whole process. Okay, now we'll request Mr. Sandhu to start the moderating session. Mr. Sandhu has immense experience in all these sectors, and Mr. Sandhu will be introduced by Sri Balaji. Over to you, Balaji.
I take the privilege of inviting Sri Davinder Sandhu sir, who is currently working as independent advisor to KPMG, who was formerly their national head for transport and logistics. Then during his tenure at KPMG, sir had led many cross-sectional teams for developing projects, and sir has the privilege of working for South Asia's first Hyperloop project between Mumbai and Pune. And sir also has looked into national e-market, e-logistics marketplace, played an important role in developing national transportation policy for Bhutan. Sir was a 1988 officer of Indian Railway Traffic Service. Sir has the distinction of completing MA in Honors, MA Economics, and MBA HR. After working years together in railway operations, sir also worked as a Ministry of Railways Chief Spokesperson. Sir had the distinction of working in PMO as director for 6 years, long time. Sir was a sector director for transport infrastructure, had played a very important role in interfacing with industrial bodies and media. Also worked for some time as director of PM Relief Fund. Sir is also an advisor to ED and board official of Executive Board of World Bank, where he is representing India, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. And sir is also a technical advisor to Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Facility, World Bank. We thank you, sir, for accepting the invitation of CILT to participate as moderator, and we welcome you gladly. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and it is really a pleasure to be speaking amongst this august speakers who have just spoken. I see a robust response from the audience on the chat board also. I think we are covering both the private sector as well as the responses that come out from some part of the public sector and the farmer side. So I think everything is well represented in terms of production, both distribution and then finally last mile logistics. I think the important, we don't want to go into the constitutional issues around these amendments, whether it's in the state list or concurrent list or, there are a number of SLPs that lie with the Supreme Court and all those issues will be taken care of. But I think it's important for us to understand one particular point. The APMC acts of most state governments did not bar farmers from entering into any private contracts with anybody. There was no such bar. The only expectation was that whatever trade takes place within the boundaries of a state government, there will be certain duties and cesses which are due, and therefore that payment would have to be made. But there was, I think it's not reasonable to say that there was a bar on farmer selling. Even if you look at the states of Punjab and Haryana, there are large buyers like ITC, etc., and there are lakhs of tons of cereals and horticulture produce that are being procured on an annual basis. I want to shift entirely to the the logistics framework part of this whole conversation. Dr. Ramanjaneyulu rightly mentioned the first mile part. Now, if there is no first mile movement out of the village, where do you go? Now, if you look at the states that are procuring 90% of the central pool of food grains, which is for food security of the country, then that particular market cess was being used for maintaining the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana roads. And therefore, if that particular funding is to be taken away from farm logistics, how do you evacuate the farm produce from the farm and the village to anywhere? If you see over the last 5 years, from around 2015 to 2016, there's been a drastic cut in the maintenance grant that was coming from the Ministry of Rural Development for rural roads across India. As you all know, PMGSY contracts maintain, a 5-year annuity basis, where first 5 years is maintained by the contractor. But after that, it is the state governments themselves who are entirely responsible for maintaining those rural roads, which are the first mile foundation of agricultural movement. And so if those cesses get hurt, let's understand that there will be no rural roads, and it's impossible to go forward from that. It's something like saying, if you see the escrow fund of NHAI, the government says that out of the central road fund that is collected, a certain amount of money will compulsorily be passed to NHAI for capitalizing the escrow funds. As a result, the developers have confidence, and so therefore we have a rapidly expanding national highway sector. If you look at the state governments whose remit it is to maintain the first mile logistics, there was an assurance that out of the money that gets collected from the APMCs, that money goes for maintenance of those logistic assets, and therefore that was functioning. I'm not commenting at all on the condition of APMCs, whether they should have done better or not. That's beyond the remit of this conversation, and I'm focusing entirely on the logistics part. So I think what these reforms need to tackle very clearly in the first instance is what's going to happen to farm logistics. As the speakers have rightly mentioned, 15% of the GDP is actually responsible for 55% of our population, which is the farmers and the rural areas. And therefore, there is already a great amount of inequity that lies amongst, this spread. If there's any reform that is perceived as creating further inequity and not increasing the size of the kitty that is available to this 55% of our population, a social unrest will occur. And we see that right now, as I'm sitting in Delhi, the city of Delhi is virtually islanded from the rest of the country. So I think what essentially impacts us in the complete economy, the statement that the farm reforms should make is, and as the Prime Minister has rightly said a number of times, that this farm reforms will double farmers' income. Now, if you make that statement, it becomes acceptable. But if it is just a reform where there is haziness about where we are headed, then naturally the people who are dependent on MSPs and other systems at this point of time will develop worries about that, and those worries sometimes will spill onto the roads. I think we are all aware of the fact that for the last some time, while earlier the subsidies that went in via FCI for MSP were part of the general budget, but now they're off-budget items, and therefore the FCI has been conducting off-market operations. Currently, there's a huge bill of some 3 lakh crores of debt which lies on FCI's books. And therefore, one can understand the concern of the government in trying to find that if the FCI balance sheets are going to be stressed by 1 lakh crores every year on account of the MSP, then there is need to do something. But I think in the interest of transparency and the democracy that we are, if we can come out and discuss these issues with all the chief ministers, with all the farm lobbies, with all the farm chain experts, like the speakers on this forum, we will certainly come out with better resolutions. And Manek has rightly mentioned that Unupom rightly mentioned that if you look at the triad that supported the green revolution or the white revolution or even the blue revolution around marine produce, the first leg of that is production. And if you go back and look at government's policies, whether it was a green revolution or whether it is for white revolution, the foundation of that was an assured price to farmers. So I think the whole fundamental of farm logistics depends on giving that assurance to the producer that there is a certain price that you'll be given. They are disaggregated, they are small, they are marginal, they have concerns that they have no strength in the market, and therefore I think it's important to address those issues. The fact of need to increase capital formation in agriculture, 100%. There's no, I mean, it's one of the sectors that almost gets no capital formation. Look at the agriculture, look at the irrigation schemes, look at the command area projects that have been languishing, for 30, 40 years, at times. So I think if one gives that confidence to the farmer that, the total value that's going to be increased in the agriculture sector is going to move in the farm community's favor, whatever is the statement that need to be made, whatever are the post-act policies that need to be put in place, I think they're very important. And I think as far as logistics goes, I would like to see as part of this reform, a clear statement on farm logistics policies. Now, I know that I was seeing that the government has set up a small directorate within the Department of Agriculture, which is going to see how we are going to move forward. I've been involved with INAM, and when I was at the Prime Minister's office, I mean, those were the founding kind of conversations that were held, and finally the INAM came into being. We are all clear it's not delivering to its original expectations. Government is rightly thinking on INAM too, but I think we need to understand the fact that how these reforms are impacting logistics. Currently, whatever effect I see, it is harming in the sense of taking away a large part of the capital that the states were using for maintaining farm logistics, because essentially it is rural roads. And secondly, at this point of time, I'm not able to determine how this policy or these reforms are actually impacting farm logistics or agri logistics in a slightly better fashion. So let me just start off the session by asking Anupam. So Anupam, you mentioned the issue of capital, and I think it's important for us all to know that what do you think can be done actually for getting these huge investments in agri logistics?
Thanks, Sandhu. See, we need to look at the global template of inviting investments in the areas which have been perennially and perpetually deprived of the capital. And the global experience tells us that the tax incentive is the best tool to invite the domestic capital and the global capital with policy certainties, where the policy volatility is at the minimal or almost zero. Then the amount of money that will come would be more than that we seek, for the simple reason we have seen, whether it is India's IT sector or it is Australian investment in the agriculture in the decades of 50s, 60s and 70s, or Argentinian example, or Brazil. You take any country where they have made significant progresses in the agriculture sector as a whole. And tax instrument was, the tax incentive was the primary instrument with which those investments were invited, because those were all long gestation projects. So if we take a leaf out of our own book of growth in IT sector, of 15 to 20 years of tax breaks on the agri-logistics, productivity enhancement process, and the food processing sector. Because if you start producing 50 to 100 million tons more as you are doing today over next 5 to 7 years, obviously this has to be delivered to our neighboring markets and wherever the markets are available in a value-added form under the conditions that those countries allow agriculture produce to land there. And that would require investments which can be recovered over 10 to 15 years. So the a very favorable investor-friendly tax income tax regime where it is completely exempted or capped at a particular level will go a long way in bringing those huge capitals. As you mentioned about the irrigation, I mean, India needs close to $200 billion alone in the irrigation itself. It requires close to around $4 billion for a unit, I mean, around 1 lakh hectare. And if we talk about 50 million hectares more to be irrigated, we would need close to $200 billion. And that money is right now, the fiscal constraints that we are experiencing over last 4-5 years. I think the government doesn't have those kind of monies to support investment, either the irrigation projects or the infra-logistics in hinterland or infra-logistics at the port, and the food processing capacities to take care of the increased production once it materializes. So anywhere between 15 years to 20 years of kind of a tax-friendly investment policy will go a long way.
Yeah, thank you, Unupom. Let me come back to Dr. Ramanjaneyulu. There's an interesting question asked by Gayatri from the audience, and she wants to know that will market-led growth in horticulture actually see the returns to smaller farmers increase? I mean, essentially, she's raising a question of whether the market reforms will actually be more equitable in rewarding, the poorer people more. And I also, Dr. Ramanjaneyulu, want to share a conversation that I've had around last week with a major logistics player. I asked him that, what do you see? So he says that I see some, some advantage in now going, bulk and investing more in silos. And therefore, I can stock during the market when the market is full, and then of course take the arbitrage 6 months later. So I said, why not build the units at the village level, that the farmers pay you some money for storing, and in that case you share the advantage of upward prices 6 months later. Some he pays to you as storage cost, and the other arbitrage he takes himself. And he was very clear. He said, why would I do that? Why would I invest money in that? So I think there are issues of equity that are coming up here about where investments will happen and whether those investments will make the agri sector and farm incomes more equitable. And as I said, Gayatri is asking this question about how do you see this going forward?
So thanks, Sandhuji. See, the clear what comes clear in this discussion is about strengthening the supply chain and then building the infrastructure facilities and streamlining the processes. I think is very, very clear. But if this has to happen, whether market moves down to the farmer or farmers moves up to the market, so who builds this is something which is very important. Today, farmers are very aggregated, very segregated, and then they're all individuals, very small farmers. And so a kind of investment which need to be made at a farmer's level to aggregate their produce. In terms of aggregation is more about also about planning production. So what varieties they grow, how they aggregate, and then how they can grade and do. So all that is something which is important. So that's where investments have to go. So building and then strengthening farmer producer organizations can certainly help. I think that is something which is very important. So the kind of investments made in every sector. So there's a lot of discussion now going around how IT sector has grown, how other sectors have grown. Similar investments have to go on to the farmer producer organizations also in terms of building their capacities and building infrastructure facilities. So that kind of support will certainly help. There is a growing market for fresh fruits and vegetables, but the entire value chain has also to be looked into, because say today if you look at tomatoes or if you look at any of these vegetables, the price realization for the fresh produce is very little. So we also need to think of when there is a bulk, when there are seasonal fluctuations, and then when there is a glut in the market, what else can be done? So that kind of investments also has to go. So some of these investments had to be made by the government and create incentive structures and then create support systems for the farmers. I think that is something which is very, very important. In this whole discussion about market reforms and when we are looking at a change, taking farmers along with us is the critical part. So how do we take them along with us? So today we are all trying to change everything else, but not taking farmers with us. So that's where actually we are seeing this kind of resistance. How do we take farmers along with us is the whole serious issue, because after all they are the producers. So production, strengthening production, and so production planning, production, and then post-harvest management at the farmers level. So first mile aggregate up to the first mile aggregation, I think is the best done by the farmers themselves and then farmers organization. If the investments can be made there in terms of infrastructure, capacity building, and finances, so working capital, etc. If these three can be done, rest of the supply chain can be built like the way we are all discussing. And if the first mile aggregation is not strengthened, any amount of investment made in the rest of the supply chain will not help, because your production is not stronger. Second thing, much is talked about, Manek has well presented about the data and all. 2-3 issues I want to bring up. Many times we compare our productivities with other countries, which is wrong, because we also need to look at our own agroecological conditions. It's not just about soil types and farmers' practices. It's also about the weather conditions and all. Tropical yields versus temperate yields, there is a significant variance. We need to understand that. And when we talk about unless we look into it, it's not going to work in terms of just saying, say Argentinian cotton yield is much higher than India, or Turkey yield is much higher than India. It doesn't make difference, because say even if you're talking about technology, India uses hybrids in cotton, but Turkey doesn't use hybrids at all. So it's not the technology which makes the difference, it's agroecology which makes the difference. So understanding that and then planning accordingly is something which is very, very important. So in long run, I would see Indian opportunity in production lies in terms of reducing the cost of cultivation and becoming competitive. So reducing the cost of cultivation, there are two ways. One is about reducing the cost by subsidizing, or second is moving into more efficient production systems. Today we are not into efficient production systems. So technology wise, it's very, very, very inefficient, and the kind of inefficiency which is bringing in because of the very poor extension services, and then also the kind of agrochemicals which are used by the people, or the inefficiency in irrigation, all these add to the cost. So that's how the unit cost of production is very high. So in the international market, we can never be competitive with the kind of production we have. We need to work on improvising the production first. Then you can do all the rest of the things. So investment here is something which is very important. So last 60-70 years we have done in a particular way. So from there, how do we move is the first and foremost critical step. So if that is done, the rest of whatever we are doing as these new reforms will help. But if that is not done, whatever we are doing as reforms will again hurt the farmers, and then that's the fear today farmers are having, and then that's where we are seeing the agitation. So that's what is the issue we need to address squarely.
Thank you so much for that intervention. And Mike, that brings me back to what you were just mentioning about how Indian produce is much more expensive in the markets, and sometimes as compared to global markets. And sometimes having sat in apex policy forums, I always thought that policy decisions were being taken away from the real mud and sun and difficulties of real farm life. I mean, people were so much more away from it. But I want to specifically flag two things for you, because out of this whole reform business, recently after the reforms, the government invoked the Essential Commodities Act and banned the export of onions. Why should anybody do that? How do you see that as a supplier? If you develop a contract because world market prices of onions are high, suddenly government imposes a ban. What are you going to do? And then if we all saw that when the farmers from Uttar Pradesh wanted to utilize the farm laws and wanted to sell their produce in Haryana, it was the Haryana police that actually beat them back and said you cannot enter the state of Haryana. And this was right after the passing of these new laws. So I think, how do you see this? I mean, it's not so easy. At the end of the day, it's food, and we have a food security issue. If there's a problem of onions in India, who's going to export it? I mean, we need wheat, we need rice. So how do you see this whole picture developing? I mean, one way to see it in a very faraway manner, but how does it work in the ground?
One of the things that we see is that, one of the major issues is price. As I mentioned that, and just to come back to your first question about the government invoking the Essential Commodities Act immediately after passing the amendment, I think the only thing that they've done in the amendment is that come out with a clarification that they will use a certain formula to start thinking about invoking the Essential Commodities Act. They have still not given up their rights of invoking the act. So I think reading between the lines, and I think onion is just a political issue. We've seen governments fall on the back of volatile onion prices. So I think that's more of a political decision rather than because it makes headlines so quickly. But Essential Commodities Act, invoking of the Essential Commodities Act is a big problem for companies like ourselves and other large trading and processing companies. And this has been one of the reasons why, large scale investment by us in, we are always worried about large scale investment of domestic produce. So far, I think for the most part, the government has kept the imports out of the ambit of the ECA. But domestically, so if we had a choice to buy import as well as domestic at the same price parity, we would prefer to buy imported at the same price parity, because for the most part, it's not a written law, but for the most part, it has stayed outside the ambit of the ECA. But now I think the only improvement is that the government has come out with a formula which is comforting to some extent. There is some arbitrariness that has gone out of that decision making. But with that example of the UP farmers wanting to sell in Haryana and getting beaten up, I think that's just uncalled for. And I think it's just going to take a matter of time and stronger sort of for these laws to really seep into that they have to be followed by everybody. I think right now, because there is so much pushback from various governments, implementation of that is not going to happen very easily in the country. But essential commodities is a big issue, and I thought that some of the fine print, some of the things that the government said that as to when they can invoke it, maybe if they had made it more clear that given a mechanism as to what would happen at if the price reaches a particular point, because when we look at so to answer your question, it's a better version of what it was before, but it still doesn't give you a lot of comfort. So and I think you mentioned about prices going, if the production goes up, where do we find whether we are able to export this, food sufficiency. I think the problem is that the demand and supply of commodities tends to become very erratic, especially the supply. And because we have a closed policy with regard to import export, we have a bit of an erratic policy with regard to import export. There is no medium to long-term planning of making sure that enough produce is available in the country. Now, when you look at pulses prices, what happened to pulses prices in 2015, or just because the economy is the tariff structure, the decisions on how much to allow, what to allow, at what price to allow, this is so controlled, nobody is able to take a decision with 60, 90, 120 days in mind. And to be able to import from US, Canada, it's a 3-4 month process, because by the time you place the order today, the vessel is placed in Canada, Australia, and the cargo is shipped and it makes its way into India. And the problem is that the decisions are just being made at the last minute, which just doesn't allow you to get enough supply into the country to pull those prices off. So I think clarity on medium-term, long-term policy with regard to tariffs is going to go a long way in reducing the volatility in these prices domestically as well.
Thank you so much. I saw Dr. Ramanjaneyulu raise his hand. I think he wants to.
Yeah, I just want to add on, since you asked about the question about onions. See, this season, if you take just before before this COVID, around that time, farmers' prices for onions have fallen, and then it was very low. And during the season when the prices went up, nearly about 40, farmers were getting about 40 rupees per kg. So near about 4,000 per quintal was the price which farmers were getting because of the price rise, and government suddenly intervened because of the using this Essential Commodities Act. So this government intervention, if it is not there when there is a price fall for farmers, but when it intervenes when there is a price rise, that certainly distorts what farmers can also realize in the market. So that is a problem which I'm trying to say. So like there is an uncertainty for the buyers, there is also uncertainty for the producers today. So the bureaucracy which takes these decisions is very erratic decisions and then completely unaccountable. So they simply take a decision and then no one knows why such decision is taken and then how that would be imposed onto the people. So that's something should go, and there should be proper planning from the government side to give a heads up. And then if they're not intervening when the price is falling, they have no right to intervene when there is a price is going up. I think that's something which is very, very a common expectation which anybody will have. So that's a problem from the government side. I think I would say even after this new laws came in and then Essential Commodities Act, they said all this, but simply to show to the people that these policies will not have impact on consumers and they will intervene. They simply intervene and then they reduce the prices. I think that kind of political interventions impact on the people. Yeah.
I think that's a very very relevant intervention, and because I think if the government comes in as an honest regulator, then it must remain honest to that regulation and make sure that it is stabilizing the market, both in terms of the consumers, producers, and the other commercial players in the market, and that has really been missing. And I think we have a long way to go to do that. I mean, Swaminathan committee, a number of other committees, both the national parties having it in their manifestos, but coming at loggerheads, the farmers feeling insecure. At least we don't see much, even a conversation around how this policy is, improving farm logistics in the country. In fact, at this point of time, the maintenance of rural roads is completely under threat, because if the market cess is withdrawn, which a large number of the agriculture dependent states are using. So I think those are the issues that are there. Some very good questions. And Ravi, I see you posted a question on contract farming. I think we're running out of time. I think the answer has been given by Dr. Ramanjaneyulu. If the government can stand in with risk capital, let me sort of put that up a bit. If there's a contract that is to be executed between A and B, then the government has to stand in as the honest referee and put its signature there with the risk capital. And if there's a problem, that problem has to be addressed. And we all recently saw a very good film, on the rights of the people. I think if the decision has to be taken, then the decision has to be taken in favor of the government, not in favor of those who govern. I think that those are important things to go forward in our country. So to understand that to implement these policies where everybody, the producer, the consumer, and the agencies in between, both private and public, can operate in a regulated environment in which regulation is fair to everybody. It will take some time to develop that. There is no magic bullet that has been fired with these reforms. It is a work in progress, but I think these learnings will need to be factored in before we go forward. And currently, I think we see a little red flag that's being raised as far as the first mile logistics on rural roads maintenance and their long-term sustainability is concerned. I think it's 1 p.m. Ravi, I'll hand back to you. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Sandhu, for the wonderful exposition. But Sandhu, can you just can we have another 5 to 6 minutes so that some of the questions which are raised by the audience are not covered? So I think we can ask Chaitanya, Balaji, or somebody to repeat, or you can also do that.
Absolutely. I think let's Chaitanya do that. I saw the questions that are there on the chat on the YouTube channel. But if there are others that they are aware, please go ahead.
We have one question from Gayatri, which I think is beyond the panel's remit. We are not discussed about tech like blockchain or as part of SCM and logistics. Yeah, this is beyond the remit of I think the webinar, because that itself is a huge area by itself, and logistics and blockchain can be independent webinar by itself. So, but if any of the panelists want to say anything where they have tried it or anything, they can kindly intervene and tell something. Otherwise, we'll pass it to Gayatri Madam. We'll pass on the question to next session somewhere down the line. Anything, Anupom or Manek, that your companies are trying in implementing blockchain in any of the commodity trades or anything?
Not in India, but we have used blockchain technology for international shipments of soybeans between Brazil and China, and that was executed during the lockdown period, and they were successful. But at the moment, the various stakeholders in international trade, which is the banks, the customs, it's not something which is scalable today or available today at a worldwide level, but between certain sectors, between certain companies, it has already started. And as Glencore, we are one of the companies, we are one of the 5 companies that have implemented a blockchain solution between Brazil and China.
Okay. When we say blockchain you are implementing, how exactly does it differ from the regular trade, and what are its advantages that you envisage or that your firm has seen?
So in terms of documentation, when I say so all the documentation, export documentation, right from Brazil all the way to the customer is electronically transmitted through blockchain. So, normally when otherwise physical documents need to move, like bills of lading, certificate of origins need to move from origin to, let's say, if there is a kind of third country seller in between, then and from their banks to the buyer's bank, and then, customs on both countries need to handle physical documents, verify them before the goods can be cleared. So in this case, the entire chain is electronically handled. I don't know the sort of technology details in it, but it's basically all electronic handling of all documents between all the people, including customs and bank.
Okay, thank you, Manik. I think Ramu wants to intervene. Ramu Garu, let's be brief, but please elaborate on what you did in the organic markets.
So we are trying to use it in the organic market. So if there are between the produce moves from different players from the farmers, it is aggregated at the cooperative FPO level, and then from FPOs it moves into the processors, and then processors to the retailer, the people who export, and then in the US market when it is distributed to the retail chain. So there are a number of players in between. So to have a traceability between the commodity, and particularly when the products are used to make produce, say we produce grains, but there are processors who makes products out of it. They make cookies or they make some other products. So 2-3 commodity produce are mixed, ingredients are mixed together to make a product. So to establish this traceability, this blockchain technology is deployed. So each block is actually represents a different stakeholder. So how it moves from one block to another, and how the data can be managed without tampering. So these two are the critical components of the blockchain technology. So that's where actually this is deployed, and there's the initial trial happening. But as Manek is rightly said, it's an expensive process and also human resource intensive. So we need to also see, that's also one, I would say, a long-term investment one need to make into this to build the technology, to build the infrastructure, and also build the human resource capacities to handle that. I think that's the thing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think it answers partly the question posed by the audience. There is another question from Gayatri. For the CSD, the process of FPO facilitation is still old-fashioned with very limited focus on packaging, marketing, or understanding differentiated products. Say disease-modifying foods. How about this? And how does CSD work on this? I'm not sure what she meant by CSD. If any of you can take this question, shall I repeat the question because it's a long question, so I repeated it fast. For CSD, the process of FPO facilitation is still old-fashioned with very limited focus on packaging, marketing, or understanding the differentiated products. Say disease-modifying foods. How about this? How does CSD work on this? Any panelist would like to take this question? But of course, what is CSD? I'm not able to understand. Ramagar, are you able to understand what is CSD?
No, I don't know. If it is about CSA, then I can answer. Because since we work with FPOs, I can say this. See, like I mentioned, the first mile aggregation of the produce or process pack. So if that has to be handled by the FPOs, we need to invest on that. I think that's a clear thing we need to think of immediately if that has to happen. So what we tried out is we tried the primary FPO. So we tried to create federations of FPO, like the women's self-help group movement in this country. Instead of having each FPO as an independent body, we tried to create federations of them. And primary FPOs at the village level largely focus on backward integration in terms of supporting farmers to produce, make a plan, have access to all input services, either it's inputs, extension, or about the finances, that kind of thing. And their role ends at the aggregation level. And then the federation takes over and then it processes packs. So that kind of, so forward linkages are established by the federation. So that's the model we tried out. So number of attempts are being made by various agencies in terms of innovating on the institutional part, so that we can reach the scale. So reaching the scale is one of the very important things. So a planned production and efficient aggregation, and then reaching out to the market in terms of at a cheaper cost. I think that is an important issue. So that can be achieved by one of the design we tried out is a federation of FPOs, and there could be other designs which one can do. Yeah.
I think we'll take the last question, but it is already answered to some extent. But if anybody wants to respond further, we can. Is export-driven prosperity feasible for Indian agriculture? Manek, would you like to take it? Or Anupam, would you like to take it? Any of the three of you?
I mean, it's,
can I take this? Okay.
Okay, Anupam.
Yeah, okay. Please, welcome.
So, the whole problem, which I've always believed in, and I'm again reiterating my belief here, it's a bit of a maverick perspective, but nonetheless it is. We have been looking at Indian agriculture system from a fragmented or broken lens. Everything that is expected from for the objective of benefiting farmer is expected out of the central government, whereas agriculture is a state subject. So when the founding fathers of Indian Constitution looked at agriculture as a subject, they could not visualize or envisage that Indian agriculture will move from subsistence to commerce. And for last 6-7 decades, we remained mostly a subsistence vocation as far as agriculture is concerned. And that is where the agriculture was comfortably placed in the state list of the Indian Constitution. Now, most of the policies that we are talking about, or MSP or everything, it is made by center. The fiscal provision has to be provided by the central government, and states are mostly the seekers, and the central government is always required to become a giver at all point of time. Now, we need to change that lens of looking at Indian agriculture production system from the state lens, and it has to move to the central subject, and we need to look at Indian agriculture land mass as a national resource rather than a fragmented state monitored resource and its mobilization. As Mr. Anjaneyulu has mentioned about ecological zones, ecological compatibility of productivity. Now, the problem is that India has its own ecological categories, but who is going to decide that what is to be grown there to meet the international levels of productivity? So the countries which are boasting of a higher productivity, they have matched their ecological systems with the productivity that ecological system can actually deliver. India, we never did that. I mean, would it be today in the current constitutional construct? It is impossible for central government to tell that Punjab should not produce paddy. It is impossible. Unless we look at this entire 141 million hectares of landmass as a national resource, we create a GST kind of a council called Agriculture Council. There, all the policy makers, stakeholders, farmers, everybody come together and see what should be produced in which ecological landmass and how it can be done productively in such a fashion that it meets international aggregation levels and produce for the world market. Do not produce for mere subsistence and some marginal marketable surpluses. Create production, international quality produce, compete with Argentina, US, Brazil, Australia, whoever it is, by managing the landmass. I mean, America is also is a much bigger country than India is, and they are managing, despite having a federal structure, they're managing their utilization of landmass in a fashion that they have been able to brought up their products internationally acceptable. So we need to change the lens at the central level. The government has to start consulting with the state and other stakeholders that how this national resource can be put into perspective in a fashion which meets the aspirations and needs of 55% population. So export orientation will come from sell and produce. I mean, India has been grappling with a produce and sell mindset. Indian farmer will just pick up what his neighbor is doing or what his forefathers have been doing and pick up that, rather than trying to sell first and produce later. The evolved economies of the OECD farming nations, they sell first and then they produce later. And India also has a very small part of the production system, which is sell and produce, which we all know as MSP system. MSP system is essentially a sell and produce, but unfortunately the counterparty is not uniformly delivering on its promise. The counterparty is Government of India. And the Indian farmer, by looking at the MSP of 23 commodities produced with the hope that it will be able to sell it to the Government of India. And that is where we see the hotspots of UP farmers coming into Haryana and getting beaten up, because they thought that they are into one farmer, one nation, one market kind of a concept. But they realize because the MSP contract delivery system is not homogeneously implemented. So we see these kind of stories coming up. So the whole problem is that the FCI, which is a central agency, is doing its job good in Haryana and Punjab, not doing good in the UP and other place. We will continue to see these kind of situations and the politicization of these issues unless we start looking at this 141 million hectares as a national resource. So I think the prosperity is possible. We need to change the lens.
So quickly, do the other panel members have anything to add? Quick, I think we'll close. Manek, you have something to add?
Not really, no.
Ramagaru?
Yeah, just to add on to what Kaushik has said, I feel it should be in a concurrent list, not a central list, because states should certainly have its control on what needs to be done, and at the same time also accountability. Today that accountability is not there. I think that is something which is important, and we have seen a lot of crisis is also from the centralization of decision making. And so decentralization of decision making is very important. So how do we move into that is something which is very important. And second is export orientation is important, but that is not sufficient, because nearly about 80% if it is consumed locally, and then if there are serious issues with the logistics there also, hinterland logistics, if we have to improve, we need to focus on that also. I think that is something which is very important. So how these two can be handled is what lies the future.
Okay, we'll close with this, and I think Unupom, I just forgot, it's quite a maverick, as you rightly said. Your sessions and in the current quality of possible and feasible, I don't know, I have my reservations. Anyway, so thanks to everybody, and now I request Sri Vishal Arjun to propose the vote of thanks. But before that, thanks to everybody. It's quite a personal achievement to bring. I treat it as a personal achievement to bring such knowledgeable people onto a single platform. Yeah, Vishal, please.
So at the outset, I would like to thank our three panelists for taking their time and speaking about the issues of agriculture logistics and the related issues, which is often undiscussed or remains rather unknown to most of us, sir. Sir, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our moderator, Sri Davinder Sandhu, IRTS, sir, for being the linchpin and steering this discussion backed by years of logically discussed, and we had brought out a number of solutions which would be thought deeply into for future policy making as well as practical implementation of them. And these are not just the issues of the farmers or the businesses that is concerned with them, but is the issues that is faced by every one of us. So the question now remains is, will India start to sell and then produce, as one of our elite panelists spoke? Sir, finally, I would take this opportunity to thank our CILT Regional Director, Sri Ravibabu, sir, for organizing this webinar. And my sincere thanks to Sri Chaitanya, sir, Sri Balaji Kiran, sir, and Sri Srikant and Sri Sadik for making this webinar a grand success. Thank you, one and all.
Finally, thanks to the audience at the YouTube forum. Without you, we are not there. Thank you very much. So we can close. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day and stay safe.